Do we have a quorum yet?
Not yet.
Not yet.
And it's not quite 5 o'clock yet, so we're good.
Hello.
Hello there. How are you, sir?
Good afternoon.
I'm good, sir. How are you?
I'm doing great, thank you. Doing great.
Good. You look well.
Well, I'm feeling good, trying to get as much rest as I can and stay away from COVID.
Yeah, I think we all trying to do that. I didn't miss it. I didn't miss it. I got involved with it and got over it. So
Oh, did you?
yeah, I'm glad to be on the other side.
So do you have the antibiotics, the antibodies that would do good for the rest of us?
I still the verdict is still out on that one.
No, okay, okay.
Hello, Stephen. This is Darlene.
Hey, Darlene, how are you?
I'm well. How are you and your family? Well, I know how with the COVID. Sorry about that.
Yeah, we're doing well. Doing well.
It's
Trying
good.
to stay motivated.
Hello, Darlene and Carol and Stephen and Joshua and Olosa.
Yep. Good to see y'all.
Hi, Pastor Davis. How are you?
I'm
How's
good. How are you?
everybody?
Great.
Hey, Carol.
Thank you for that courage tape, by the way, Carol. It was fantastic.
Wasn't it? I said, I got to listen to it again.
Yeah, yeah.
We need that message right now. Very positive.
Dr. Curry, for the rest of you, Dr. Curry is the person who did the message at the Prince's wedding, and he's the presiding bishop over the Episcopal Church. This past weekend, he was the guest speaker on Historically Speaking, and did a wonderful job.
You're talking about Michael Curry,
Michael Curry.
Yeah,
right.
he's outstanding.
Yeah,
I've heard him in person.
Oh, it was a wonderful, just talk about what we need to do in this country to love each other.
Yeah, yeah.
He keeps it down to earth.
He's written a book about love, so that's what they were primarily talking about. So.
Yeah.
Now, before we get started, can I convince you to email me a link to that so I can
do that because I still have it.
Excellent. Thank you.
That. I might be able to put it on.
too.
No, I shouldn't put it on here. How should I do that?
Hi, Cal. Can you share it too with me?
I can. Just trying to figure out how would I do that. I shouldn't put it on here, should I? Because it's not a commission.
No.
Right. All right. I will get it and I will send it out.
Okay.
A reminder that we are live on YouTube. I'm
And
just doing
All
the
right.
count.
Thank you, Cindy Lou. Thank you all for joining us for the meeting of the Racial Equity and Policing Commission's meeting. Today is November 18, 2020. It's a little after 5 p.m. Our meeting is a discussion among the commissioners with our facilitators and selected presenters. The public, of course, is welcome to join us, to be a part of our meeting, to listen, and there'll be a time at the beginning of our meeting, 15 minutes or so, that we'll allow for public comment. The meeting also is being held electronically pursuant to a core commission's determination that conducting the meeting at a physical location presents a substantial risk to health and safety for those who may be present at the at the anchor location. Our numbers today, some of you have heard of over 3,000 persons today alone here in the state of Utah. So our numbers are still growing. The commission's meeting will not have a physical location, and all attendees will connect remotely. Members of the public can participate in the public comment. Here's the phone number that you can call in order to do so. It's 1-800-934-9182. 1-800-934-9182. And at the time of now's a good time to place your call and be put on the waiting list to talk with us. You may also follow along with us on the SLC REP live commission meeting YouTube channel, or you can visit the website of the city and be able to catch us that way, or you can make a phone call, 801-535-7644. Welcome to members of the commission, to our facilitators, Dante and the Langdon Group, and also welcome to staff from the city who are part of this meeting today. And we heartily greet and welcome all of you. We're ready now to begin our meeting, and I'm going to ask Dante if he'll lead us for the rest of the agenda, or call on persons that he wish to speak. Staff will be a timekeeper where we need Dante, and Larry and Cindy will be responsible for the public comment section, I believe. But now we're ready to begin. And as public attendees, if you wish to speak, we want you to limit your comments to 1 to 2 minutes at a time, to be determined by the number of attendees. And in a few minutes, we'll see if we know how many people we have, Larry, and maybe you can tell us. Please observe the time limit. Also, please be aware that your comments should be free of discriminatory language referring to a person or a group based on their religion, ethnicity, nationality, race, color, descent, gender, sexual orientation, disability, age, or other gender identifying factors. And items of comment that disrupt the meeting or intimidate other participants, and make sure you stay away from those that may cause safety concerns for any members of our commission or those that are online. Thank you again for listening to our instructions as we began. And Dante, I'll turn the time over to you now to lead us through the rest of our agenda, starting with the public part, public comment. You're muted, Dante.
Wouldn't be a Zoom call, right? So what I was saying was brilliant and you just missed it, so I'll try to repeat it.
Oh, shame.
Thank you, Reverend Davis, and good afternoon, late afternoon, commissioners. Good to see you again. As a whole body, we haven't had a full commission meeting in a few weeks, and as a result of the subcommittees being put into place. So good to see everyone back in place. So as we get started, I believe you've seen the agenda and received some documents that we'll also go over in just a bit. But I want to pause and check in with Larry to see if there's anyone online for any public comment.
No, sir, not at this time. Thanks for checking.
Great, thank you. So going into the agenda then, just some of the standing items. just a comment and or reminder more for the public than certainly for the commissioners that we have gone into utilizing a subcommittee structure for in order to create the most effective and efficient use of everyone's time. So there are currently 3 subcommittees that are active at this moment. One is school safety, one is training, and one is policy and practice. And then a standing committee outside of that specifically is the youth subcommittee. So at this point, I'll pause and Siobhan will kind of facilitate the subcommittee reporting as we move forward. So Siobhan.
Yes, absolutely. Subcommittees that we have going right now are the school safety subcommittee, the training subcommittee, and the policy and practices. Am I getting the name right? I always double guess myself on that one. But so I'm going to ask this week our facilitators to do the report backs, just because I know we have a lot of things on this agenda. That doesn't mean in future weeks that we're not going to ask our participants to report back. So why don't we start with Josh and the policy committee? Give us a brief couple-minute overview of where you're at as a subcommittee.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks, Siobhan. So the policy and practice subcommittees met a couple of times as other subcommittees. Really, our focus has been on education and information gathering to make informed decisions. We've narrowed in on our immediate scope to look at use of force, policy 300, and second, to look at personnel practices and accountability within the Salt Lake City Police Department, specifically looking at hiring, which includes recruitment and diversity and the criteria for hiring, accountability, like I said, qualified immunity, also looking at firing and termination practices and standards. The third area that we're going to look into immediately is funding. This includes sources of funding, allocation, dissemination, assessment and measurements for effectiveness. And so those are the 3 primary scope areas we're looking into. Our last meeting, to build on that, the Salt Lake City Police Department was on our call to answer questions about use of force, and we had a good discussion about that. A lot of that was focused on reasonableness standard, and we also had a presentation and dialogue on personnel practices, primarily around recruiting, some of the efforts the SLCPD makes in recruiting and what type of recruitment they do. And so we'll continue that dialogue and dive deeper. As a subcommittee, we requested several documents, including the SLCPD's application, interview questions. We also reviewed the executive order from the mayor regarding use of force and had a Q&A with the SLCPD on that and understood that further. So we'll be moving forward in those areas and developing recommendations that are viable and feasible and sustainable. Anything to add from the subcommittee? Okay.
Okay, thank you, Josh. Now I'm going to pass the time to Dante to let us know how things are going with his subcommittee.
Thank you. The training subcommittee has met a couple of times now and had several of the officers specifically related to the training division come and present. And a lot of the questions and engagement was around field training officers and how that process rolls out, how people become field training officers, the process of the curriculum within the training division, discussion of some of the training in the academy, versus the in-service trainings and what those look like and how those are formulated, who decides what those are. Discussion of how the budget works for the training division as the police department is working on its now zero-based budgeting process. How is the process of the training division's budget formulated, and how can there be input or influence on maybe what that can be? Really looking at some of the demographic issues and questions of the field training officers, the recruits, and those who don't make it through probation, and what that demographic may be. And specifically then hearing from the chief as well about the overall process of the engagement with the field training officers that come from specific units and how they are selected, and discuss somewhat the actual use on the street of what the training is involved. And so how people are stopped and questioned, what is informed consent, how do they determine the race or ethnicity of those whom they stop, things like that. And so really the committee is has up to this point really been in an information gathering phase, and I think is now really prepared to now start having some deeper conversations around the information that they've learned to formulate some thoughts around possible recommendations moving forward. Commissioners, committee members, thoughts that I may have missed in that?
We did talk also about the hand-to-hand training for hand-to-hand, so maybe you can talk about that for a bit.
Great, thank you. Just a question of the defensive tactics that the officers use. What is the philosophy or the philosophical approach from what martial art that it's based in as the officers are trained, the amount of training. There is no national standard for defensive tactics training. And so what is the amount of training that officers receive in Salt Lake City, and how comfortable do they really feel in their own physicality based upon the amount of training that they received? Does that kind of cover it, Reverend? Thank you. Other commissioners?
Anyone else have thoughts? Okay. Then I will report on our school safety subcommittee, and we'll also invite my committee members to speak up if there's anything that I don't cover. But we've spent the last several meetings making sure that we're very clear on what areas of school safety are most important to focus on. What we've decided to dig deeper into is the school to prison pipeline, linking how those school resource officers and other school programs are contributing to that school to prison pipeline. Looking at the cases that go from the schools to the criminal justice system and how the result of those, the remaining disproportionality that has been reported on the impacts that these programs are having on students of color, and trying to unpack that a little bit and understand how that plays out both in the juvenile justice courts and in the schools. We've also included a look at students with disabilities in this discussion. That definition that we have of disabilities, at least for our group, includes those with mental health and substance abuse issues. Just looking if the SRO program is the very best program. Are there protocols being followed, or is it really school to school? Looking at who the program was designed to protect. Is it staff? Is it students? And how that is actually playing out, looking at the results of the actual outcomes, looking at where the referrals are coming from administrators, and how, because students, they may have to be referred through administration to interact with a school resource officer in most cases. And so looking to see how those referrals are happening, and then what happens when the student is reintegrated to the school after, say they've spent some time in a jail, I guess. I'm probably using the wrong word for that. And then our last one is how are people able to register complaints and hold the system accountable? And we have done quite a bit of reading on this subject, and one of the things that we have noticed is that there has been quite a bit of work on this subject, quite a bit of research. There's obviously still things we want to know, more detail on, and that's what we're honing in on, is exactly where we can be most effective and where our recommendations will be most effective, and how we can build on the work that's already been done to further reduce that disparity of outcomes for students that interact with that system, and if that system is still the very best system. Anyone from my group want to add to anything that I've said? Anything that I left out? Okay. Well,
Siobhan,
yes.
wanted to add, just as a side note, I mentioned in the chat that the Officer Recruitment Subcommittee merged with the Policies and Practices Subcommittee because of an overlap in interest in topic and scope. And I don't know if everyone knew that, but just wanted to mention that.
Yeah, I think the last thing that I'll state for those who aren't attending those meetings, who aren't in those rooms with us, that we're seeing great participation. We have really good numbers of folks involved. Our youth are very, very involved in those groups, and we are seeing we had a lot of people who signed up for multiple groups, which is how those two groups ended up merging, because everybody has great interest in all these topics. So I'm really enthusiastic about the work that we're able to get done in those groups, and thankful for those who are continuing to participate. So with that, I'll pass the time back to Dante.
Thank you, Shimon. I also want to give space for the Youth Commission if it wants to offer a report, if it has met individually or independently during this time.
The youth subcommittee just continues to meet weekly, and the general pattern is they come and they report back from the subcommittees that they're attending, which they seem to be very pleased with. They really like that. It seems like, oh yes, finally things are moving, yay! And then they bring up the not only do they update the group, but then they bring up questions. There's discussion, and then there's, okay, what should we follow up next? So that's the basic pattern of where they're at right now. We are right now looking into bringing in some more youth, as some youth are having to leave because of other commitments. So right now we're in that transition as well. But yeah, very pleased to be able to participate in these other subcommittees, because they feel that it's trying to move forward.
Thank you, Commissioner. And before we step into the next agenda item, I want to pause and check with Larry and see if there's anyone on the line that has any comment or question.
There is not, sir. Thanks.
All right, thank you. The next item of business is a discussion around the resignation of a commissioner and the discussion of that replacement. I believe Commissioner Batar is who has had to resign. And it's my understanding, and city staff can certainly speak to this as well, that as a core commissioner, Commissioner Batar was appointed by the mayor. And so currently the mayor or the mayor's staff were involved in discussions around how they may recommend or who they may recommend to fill that position. Is that an accurate statement, city staff?
Yes, Dante, that's an accurate statement. This is Coletta from the Salt Lake City Mayor's Office. And Mayor Mendenhall asked me to reach out to Batar to ask if he had a recommendation for who would be an ideal replacement on the commission. I've reached out to Batar and he advised that he would get his recommendation back to Mayor Mendenhall this week. So I will follow up with you, with the Langdon Group and the commission to let you know what the recommendation is and next steps to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Coletta. So the next item on the agenda is just unfinished commission business that possibly has not had an opportunity to be moved to a subcommittee. So given the last meeting minutes that have been sent out and any or previous discussion, is there anything that commissioners think has not yet found a home in a subcommittee that we need to be aware of? Commissioner Angiouiri?
Thank you.
I'm just curious on the status of the partnership pairing program with members of the department. I haven't heard about it in a few weeks. I still think that that would be a good idea, even though we're in our subcommittees, to have those opportunities to drill down more deeply into the department, get that feedback. I know it wasn't a universally grand idea by everyone on the commission, and so there were discussions of having that be voluntary. I would still like to see that happen. So I put that out for commissioners' consideration.
Thank you, Commissioner. Maybe the easiest way to do that, as opposed to on the big session, is during the next subcommittee meeting, determine who from each subcommittee would be interested in that. The chief has certainly expressed his support for that idea. And so I think if we could then take those names and that total number of individuals and provide that to the chief, we could then come back to the full commission with the response and maybe the process by which we can make those pairings happen. Does that sound reasonable?
Well, not only that, but the chief has already asked some people some officers to reach out to members of the commission. And I know one of them has called me and said that he would be available. I don't know if any others have received any calls.
Thank you, Reverend. Has anyone else received a call from any particular officer? Okay. So we'll get that information during our next subcommittee meeting and then pass that along with the chief and see if we can kind of formulate the next piece of the process. Thank you, sir. The next item on the agenda, I would ask if we can swap it and discuss the listening sessions first and then go into the presentation on equity. So if commissioners are okay with that. Cindy Lou?
Yes, you absolutely can switch the information on the agenda. I, however, just have noticed that we've skipped over a few items on the agenda and was wondering if perhaps you might want to cover those prior to. I'm not sure that I'm not sure that the final one has been provided to you. I apologize for that.
Okay.
We just are missing two pieces. One was the minutes review, the minutes that were provided to the commissioners.
Okay.
And we can certainly do these housekeeping items at the end if you'd prefer.
Okay. And what was number two?
The second was the calendar for the remainder of the year due to the holidays, just identifying subcommittees and regular commission meetings, which may also be part of the listening session discussion. So we can certainly hold those to the end. Great,
thank you. I think we might as well try to do it then at the end. I think that'll be a quick component, so we can just do it then. So if commissioners are okay, we'll let Larry go into the listening session component of the agenda. Any objection to that? Thank you. Larry, take it away.
Thank you very much. Just want to check with everybody that they can see a little infographic up on the screen that I've successfully shared. Okay. Well, thank you, everybody, and thanks to Dante for the opportunity to visit with you all tonight. I wanted to offer this as kind of a high-level roadmap of what we're contemplating for a process of listening. I think we've been talking about listening sessions, and I want to emphasize that as a public engagement professional, I've always felt that we have to provide, first of all, multiple ways for people to provide input and engage, as well as provide multiple opportunities over the course of a particular body's work to do so. And part of that has to do with the fact that when someone gives input to any kind of public body, you know, they sometimes are worried that what they said won't get taken seriously or get incorporated. And so it's important for us not just to collect the input at the beginning, but to then come back to that group that shared input with us and say, well, here's what we've come up with. What are your thoughts on how we've utilized your input? And so that's why you see this framed as a process rather than simply a list of listening sessions, for example. So between now and December 1st, we, as in the Langton Group and city staff, will be hard at work planning out both the live sessions as well as tools that people will be able to use to provide input what we call asynchronously. In other words, there'll be some sessions people join in real time, like on a particular date and time. And then there'll be ways for people either to go online or to make a phone call or to send a text message in order to convey their input in those ways. And so we're going to be working between now and December 1st to get all of that ready. Following that, and of course that takes us partially through Thanksgiving, and we'll take, you know, probably a little bit of time over Thanksgiving to rest, but we will be trying to put us in a position to begin outreach just after Thanksgiving. And so during that first week of December, last week of November, first week of December, we will be publicizing opportunities for people to engage that will include, as I mentioned, a toll-free line that'll be set up, a text message address, as well as an online portal. And I want to share with you that when it comes to online engagement, what we're imagining is not simply a survey that you might see on SurveyMonkey or Qualtrics, but also a discussion forum and a way for people to have conversations with one another. Because in a topic like this, we think it's very important for disparate parts of the Salt Lake community to be able to hear you know, differing points of view and be able to respond to that. And you know, given our experience at the Langen Group as professional facilitators, we are in a position to serve as moderators of that online discussion. So it will remain on task and on topic and compliant with all of the guidelines that we've had for regular public comment. But we think that that kind of threaded discussion will be very valuable to you all. So between December 1st and December, roughly through the end of kind of the pre-holiday portion, December 1st through the 18th, is when we'll be in that listening mode. And what you will see in the first part, more, I guess, December, that should really say kind of December 7th through the 18th in terms of live sessions, is we're intending to schedule some of our listening sessions to be ones in which you all as commissioners would be invited to attend and ask questions of the attendees. But the sessions would also, some of them would be quite honestly private, to enable the safest possible space for certain kinds of stakeholders to participate. That could range anywhere from refugee residents of Salt Lake City, undocumented immigrants, folks for whom English is not their first language, as well as potential law enforcement stakeholders who may want to share in a private setting. I want to emphasize that again, we would make these sessions available to you all, and we would provide a report that would be publicly available on at a generalized level what was shared during these sessions. But we do believe, as experts in this space, that some of our sessions should be open to the entire public and anyone can join, and some sessions need to have a certain amount of privacy to allow for the best possible result. We are targeting your commission meeting time slot on December 16th, which is a Wednesday, for a open to the entire public listening session. And what we're planning for that is to enable people to call in, text in, or post online. We also are planning to do a dial out to a random sample of Salt Lake City households, and we're working on a broadcast partner to televise and or broadcast over radio and live stream. And our purpose in doing all of that is really just to ensure that we get the maximum amount of cross-section of input. You know, it's often the case that people will sort of self-select based on a particular topic of concern, and so you may only get a narrow swath of the affected community. And so what we're hoping is that this kind of opportunity, this kind of meeting, will give you a much broader cross-section of the community's perspectives. I'll just mention also that I'll send you an email after this meeting to link you to a broadcast similar to this that I did for the city of Denver that I may have mentioned in a past commission meeting, just to give you a feel for the kind of thing that we're imagining. We anticipate that we would end this phase of listening sometime around Christmas, and that we would spend basically from that time until the early part of 2021 reviewing and analyzing the input we've received from all these different sources, and provide you all with a report in early January, presumably at your meeting that first Wednesday of the month, or whatever the next date of your full commission meeting might be. We'll also, of course, post it online and transmit it electronically. And then what we imagine will happen is that over the course of January, until your work is totally complete, what we anticipate is that you all will begin to draft potential recommendations. And what we'd like to be able to do is have sort of an iterative process in which a subcommittee or the full commission says, yes, this is feeling like a recommendation we may want to advance. And then we come back to those communities that we spoke to in the first part of this listening process and say, what are your thoughts on this? Have we missed something? Are you comfortable with this? Do we need to consider anything before this recommendation gets finalized, and so on? So again, just reinforcing the notion that it's best practice to ask those who gave input whether we got it right, whether we sort of utilized their input in the best possible way. And then, of course, we're imagining that once commission recommendations are finalized, that they'll be, presented to the Salt Lake City Council, but those presentations will happen piecemeal on an ongoing basis throughout the late winter and into the spring. And so again, we'll present something, ask for some feedback, revise and alter it as needed based on that feedback, and then deliver our final product at the end of our work. All of this, of course, is subject to change based on everything ranging from the pandemic to competing city obligations and so forth. But we, I think, believe that this will enable you to get a nice sense of the public's sentiments to inform your work and ensure that there are few to no barriers to participation for folks who want to give you that feedback. So I'll stop there and just see what questions or comments you may have about what we've laid out. And I also would encourage you all to, feel free to also contact me separately from the meeting if you'd like to discuss it. One last thing before I take questions is just to say that we would be hoping for you all to help us with some communication of outreach materials to organizations and communities with which you're intimately familiar or involved. And so I would be on the lookout for some of those materials here in the next couple of weeks, and we'll try to kind of compile a list of organizations that we're hoping to reach with our outreach. So I'll pause there and just see what questions or comments or additions from the rest of my colleagues there may be.
Question, Larry.
Yes, Reverend
Davis. I don't understand what you mean by private and versus public. So can you be more specific about?
Yes, sir.
Who we're talking about and what that is?
Yes, sir. For example, if in the case of the school subcommittee, we might want to hear from school resource officers, or we might want to hear from parents whose children have had some interaction with SROs. That's obviously a sensitive matter. And so, whereas this meeting that we're having right now is obviously fully public and anybody can watch it, I'm imagining that a listening session like that would be one that the commissioners could join, but not one that we would, broadcast to YouTube. Whereas the listening session on December 16th, to which the entire public is invited, would of course be available to the general public in that fashion. Does that answer your question?
Yes, I think it does. And I was just hoping that it didn't leave the commissioners out.
No, sir. No, it would not be. We would extend the invitation to commissioners, and we could decide whether if all the commissioners want to attend. I mean, that's certainly, I think, doable, or we could decide on it being a subset, but we're open to that. But it would be open to the commissioners. Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Of course.
Hi, this is Mark Cottrell, attorney. The one thing I would note as we talk about that topic is that and we can work on this as we move forward, that if there's to be any kind of private listening session, if it's done in the context of an open public meeting, there are only certain things you can close a public meeting for. So happy to engage in that discussion as we move forward.
For sure.
Yep.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Mark, and we will have to be cognizant of, as you say, I mean, if we have a quorum and so on, then it becomes, a different matter. So I appreciate you flagging that.
Our goal would be to reach recommendations that we can make to the council. And you don't see those happening any earlier than January through March?
No, sir, I don't. But I mean, I'm certainly open to feedback from the commission and from my colleagues. But I mean, my sense is that the subcommittees are just beginning to kind of dive into their work, and we'll need some time to digest additional background information and answers to questions they've posed. And so I was anticipating that by calendar year's end, they would be, certainly getting very familiar with the material, but would need at least 1 or 2 meetings into the new year to begin to formulate those recommendations. But I could be mistaken.
Well, I think that's a good time frame. And if we're going to do it piecemeal, January would be one item perhaps, and another item in February and another in March. That kind of process seemed to me to be a workable one. So
Yes,
thank
sir.
you.
Yeah, you bet.
Larry,
Yes. Hey, Moises.
how many listening sessions do you see? Both the
Well, that's a
private
good
and
question.
public.
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think the short answer is I'm not sure. The longer answer is, we are blocking or holding pretty significant chunks of time in December for these listening sessions on the thinking that we'll get the best result if we have a relatively small group for the ones that are meant to be with a particular audience. So as I mentioned before, like an SRO group or a parents of school-age children who have interacted with SROs. And so, it wouldn't surprise me at all if we ended up with a dozen or so sessions that were of those kind of smaller sizes. It could be more. The main thing, the main objective is just to really make sure we hit the kinds of audiences that you all shared with us through your subcommittees that you want us to engage with. And so I would, I will send to you all via email the list as I've compiled it from what the subcommittee facilitators have shared with me. And if there are audiences that we're missing, I would ask that you all flag that. But again, I mean, my experience is that once you get, especially on virtual, once you get past about 10 or 12 participants, it's tough to get everybody, engaged in the conversation robustly. So we'll err probably on the side of a smaller session and additional sessions rather than one large, session for a particular audience, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. And secondly, who's reviewing and analyzing?
That's a good question. My initial thought on that is that the Langdon Group will take the first stab at sort of compiling all of, first of all, there will be a compilation of all comments and feedback in an unabridged fashion, at least as I see it. And so there wouldn't be the commission would have the ability to see as much of that information as there is without any kind of, filter to speak of. But I think the Langdon Group, with probably some involvement from city staff, will just go through and attempt to determine some high-level themes that cross-cut across the input and just sort of formulate as best we can, a report of those key findings. But again, we would make the broader input available to the entire commission. But certainly I, speaking for myself, would welcome commission participation in that in advance of a report being made. So for anybody that's interested, I would welcome that. I can't imagine any issues with that, but if I'm wrong, someone can tell me. But I certainly would welcome commissioners, especially with a background in data analysis or social science or the like, to be part of that process.
I would like to volunteer David Litvak and Verona to do most of that data analysis.
They look thrilled. Verona looks just over the moon with that being voluntold. Point taken. Just sure, you bet. Just cognizant of time. Anything else that anyone wanted to ask or comment on?
Larry, do you anticipate doing listening sessions for the various ethnic subgroups that make up Salt Lake City?
I do, Verona. Yes, Commissioner, I do, and that's an area where we're thinking about doing that in a couple of different ways. One of which would be that someone like me or the Langdon Group facilitates them, but I'm also considering developing like a conversation guide, a host guide that could be then either given to a commissioner or maybe even given to the head of an organization that works with a particular population to kind of serve as a liaison kind of role to kind of help collect some of that feedback. Because I think in certain cases, folks may respond better to someone from their community than someone from the outside. So I welcome your advice and the commission's advice on that on a case-by-case basis. But yes, the answer is we are planning to do that.
That's great. Thank you.
You bet. I'm going to, in the interest of time, turn it back to Dante and just let you all know that, of course, via Coletta and the staff, I'm available via email and phone at any time, and you will be getting a couple of emails following up from this presentation with a few more details. But I look forward to working with you all, and thanks for the time.
Thank you, Larry. Much appreciated. A lot involved in trying to hear from everyone in Salt Lake City, which is really our goal. So all the support and offerings of recommendations that you can provide are most appreciated. Next on the agenda is something that we, the Langdon Group and the core commissioners, and I think a few others have talked about in terms of just level setting, if you will, and ensuring that there is a commonality of understanding, a commonality of language, a commonality of approach to reviewing policies, practices, budgets, and things like that. And so there's a session that I do in the confines of the consulting work that I do. And this is a small piece of that. But I'm going to share my screen, and most of it is a brief slideshow of some of the legal and legislative decisions in this country that have been based purely on race, that we put together really to answer the question, why do we need to focus on race? Because it's not about, police shootings or, police abuse specifically. It's about, there's racism in educational institutions. The police are not the criminal justice system. It's the police, it's the DAs, it's the defense attorneys, it's the judges, it's the probation officers, it's the parole board. So all of those make up a system. And so really, how do we begin to evaluate and see it for what it really is? And so I'm going to share my screen and ask for your indulgence as I do this. And this first piece is just, do we even have a common understanding of what equity is? And so this is the working definition that we use in terms of equity. That simply equity is achieved when one's identity cannot predict the outcome. And I think in most cities, states, country, and this world, one's identity, certainly one's racial identity, can absolutely predict the outcomes, and certainly in general terms. By any social indicator of success, race will predict your outcome. And the top picture is probably the most famous one. And it's not a trick question. There's nothing wrong with equality, but treating everyone equally won't get you to equity. So how do we ensure that we are providing what individuals need as individuals? And the box is just representing resources. It's not about the city having more resources. It's how do you allocate or reallocate those resources to ensure the success of what it is that you're trying to do for the residents you're trying to serve. And the fence being the barrier to that, whatever those barriers may be, which is, I think, a piece of what we're looking at now. What are the barriers to the best policing for the city of Salt Lake? The bottom picture is just a different version of equity as it relates to disability and also size, right? Someone small is not going to get on the bikes or the scooters that you can probably rent around downtown Salt Lake City.
Dante, excuse me for 1 second. You may want to consider clicking on slideshow just to make it a little bit of an easier view for the group.
You are correct. Thank you. I got started too fast.
No, I do it all the time.
There we go. Thank you. So, often geography is just a proxy for race. And so being able to look at how we do what we do, both geographically, and I keep hearing about East Side, West Side, differences in Salt Lake City. So geography is often a proxy for race. So this is just our working definition as it relates to equity. People always talk about DEI. Diversity is probably the least of what I do as a consultant, because you can have diversity all day and never change an outcome. And so the real focus is on equity, because by definition, you can't have equity, which is about outcomes, if you don't have diversity and inclusion. But you can have diversity all day and not have equity. So the real focus is on, as you're entitled, the Racial Equity Commission, right? So that's really what we're talking about. So moving into some of the history of this country. It's a slideshow with no sound, so I'm just going to run through this and then we'll have a conversation at the end. put this in here to demonstrate racism was not some Southern issue. Oregon was the only state admitted to the Union with an exclusion clause in its constitution that said Black people could not live in the state. There were already Black folks living there, so it couldn't kick them out. So it then passed what it called the Lash Law, which just said you can live here, we'll just whip you twice a year until you decide to leave. It wasn't removed from the Constitution of Oregon, nor technically legal for Black folks to move into the state until 1926. And if you don't know what a mulatto was someone who's half Black, half white. And this is technically not a true statement. If you read the amendment, the second half of the statement is an exception, which says you can still be a slave if you're under the jurisdiction of the criminal justice system. Oh, what happened? Here we go. Sorry about that. And so very specific examples of systemic and institutional racism today. Healthcare is guaranteed to Native people and Alaska Native folks in perpetuity in exchange for the millions of acres that were stolen from them. But if you look at what that actually looks like, it would require doubling the amount of dollars spent for Indian health services just to match the level of care provided to federal prisoners. War on drugs is another prime example. Crack cocaine epidemic in the 70s up through the 2000s devastated Black and brown communities, and it was an absolute war on drugs, which was a war on those communities. Initially, crack cocaine the sentence was mandatory, and it was 100 times more than for powder cocaine. Currently, it's 18-1. But when you look at what is today the opioid epidemic and crisis, it's a healthcare crisis. The majority of folks who are suffering from opioid addiction are white. The majority who die from opioids are white. And it's an absolute distinction between how crack and powder cocaine were taken care of in the Black and brown community. The last Indian school to close in this country closed in Utah. And the horrors of those schools were clearly represented in the fact that it had to close. I mean, the saying for those schools across the country was kill the Indian, save the man, where your nativeness, your language, your culture, your religion was stripped from you so that you could become better servants to the dominant culture. And again, the last one closed in your state in 1984. I hesitated to put this in because I know how sensitive the idea of religion is, but as an example, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints prohibited Black men or women from entering the temples, and certainly Black men could not become priests until 1978. The church leaders of currently today absolutely condemn that practice, but a very recent study done by the church asking the question, was that ban God's will? A majority said, yes, it was. And 17% just said, well, it might be true. And so racism was constructed brick by brick, law by law, legislation by legislation in this country by government. And therefore it's up to government to be responsible and deconstruct it in the exact same targeted, focused way, which is why we are here, certainly with government support, because government has been explicit and complicit since before we were a country in beginning, instituting, and maintaining systemic racism. There's a video that I'm going to show that's 26 seconds long from a Washington, D.C. morning show about 5 years ago. So we're going to watch this, and then we'll just come back to the large group for your thoughts and conversation. So I would suggest there's several things egregious about that particular clip. One is the obliviousness of the two white co-hosts to their colleagues, who are Black colleagues sitting on the couch next to them, who can't nor will probably ever want to aspire to what they're describing as the most beautiful face. The camera person knew it was a messed up story because they knew who to pan to try to get a reaction. Nobody asked the Black woman or the Black man to present that story. And so a lot of folks would describe this as implicit bias, and I say not at all. It's an example of white supremacy, and by that I mean just this. White supremacy has nothing to do with violence. A white supremacist is one who believes in the violent maintenance of white supremacy. But white supremacy is simply the idea and the default to whiteness for all things beautiful, intelligent, what is professional. So literally when last month Band-Aid had to rethink its flesh-colored Band-Aids because they didn't look like me, that's another example. When you can think back the Crayola crayon box and the flesh colored crayon, what color did it look like? When you pull out your phone and want to type a text message and type in teacher or doctor or nurse or something like that, or a peace sign or a thumbs up, a little yellow face pops up with long flowing blonde hair. People of color have to either hold their finger on it or decide how dark they want that picture to be. The majority of people in this world, as in more than 75%, are people of color. Therefore, the majority of people using your phones are people of color. So why wouldn't those pictures start out dark and you have to decide how light you want them to be? Simply because there was nobody who looked like me in the room designing the app, and it worked for everybody there. Therefore, it's great. And we can be oblivious to all those not within this room. When you walk in the restroom and put your hands under the sink for the faucets that you don't have to touch and the soap dispenser you don't have to touch, they're based on light refraction. The darker your skin, the more it absorbs light. They literally had to be redesigned. And if you want to install them in India, Pakistan, South Africa, countries of color, there's a process you have to go through so they work for people of color. Because clearly nobody, again, who was looking like me was in the room designing or testing them, and they worked for everyone there. Therefore, great product, let's ship it out. So again, whiteness is the default. I mean, Colorado is one of 5 states that had to pass legislation to protect the way the hair grows out of a Black woman's head, called the Crown Act. So you can't be discriminated against. There's no legislation needed for a blonde ponytail. And so again, what is the default from that dominant culture paradigm of whiteness, maleness, Christianness, able-bodiedness, right? So that dominant culture paradigm is really what we're talking about. And so we just felt the need to try to create this commonality of understanding of why we need to focus on race, why government is responsible for beginning to have to address issues of race, and what white supremacy really is. Because we hear people talk about white supremacy and how horrible it is all day. We all walk around in it every day. We just don't recognize it for really what it is. And so that's why this is so important to do this work with an understanding of how we evaluate what we do. And so one final screen share, if I might, is, where'd it go? Is this, how do we evaluate? And we hear people talk about an equity lens all day, which is just a critical thinking exercise. But if you're not sure what questions to ask, it's hard to know where to start. And so this is what we provide for our clients, just 4 basic questions that we can evaluate anything by these questions. What are the assumptions underlying why we think this is a good thing to do or a bad thing? What are the assumptions underlying this? How might this particular policy practice burden communities of color specifically? But you can, again, substitute any identity you want. If you go back to our definition about one's identity cannot predict the outcome, what identity do you want to evaluate? How do you involve the most impacted in the decision-making process, which is exactly who you are? And we are going to bring in the community even more so to involve in the decision-making process. And then your work is to address some strategies for reducing or mitigating the negative impacts and reducing the disparities that we see in our community. And that is an equity lens. And I would suggest a way to begin to think about how we're evaluating budget, how we're evaluating our policies, to use an equity lens. If you have one that's different, that's fabulous, but there must be some type of framework to use to evaluate what we do. So first I'll say I'll thank you for your time and indulgence in that, and just pause and see if there's any questions, comments, thoughts moving forward.
Well, I participate. I appreciate the films that you showed and the presentation that you made. I think it does help us to move toward a common ground, and hopefully those who are not of darker color like myself would see it as useful and helpful. I would add to your set of slides one about Dred Scott, where the Supreme Court declared that there are no rights that a person of color has, that anybody who is not colored has a right to buy it.
Yes, sir. Thank you. It's a powerful statement, absolutely, by the Chief Justice. You know, and I could add slides and we could be here all night. So it was truly difficult to try to select what's what. But thank you, sir. Commissioner Shifflet?
My group knows that I'm always going to say something, right, guys? Right, Josh? Thank you. That was absolutely wonderful. I think it was much needed for the group. And I'm wondering if this is something that we could actually show law enforcement and go through it slide by slide, not as quick as you did, and discuss these things so that they can see this history, because that brought it to life. You know, I mean, I know that it happens. I know about these things, but I don't think a lot of people know this. I just did a presentation on Black women and domestic violence, and it's amazing how many people were surprised at some of the stuff I brought up. So I'm just curious if that's
I mean, I do this work with police departments, so certainly if they would be interested, I would be happy to provide a presentation to them. Thank you. Commissioner Johnson had his hand up.
Dante, I loved your slideshow. Would you mind sharing that information?
Yeah, because I just shared it to you, it's now a public document. So, which is usually, I never share this because it's a, you know, it's a piece of our intellectual property, but I just thought it was important enough to share with all of you. And now it's a public document. So absolutely it will be, I think, part of the minutes. And so we can certainly make sure that you receive it as well.
Thank you.
Commissioner McDonald.
I just wanted to say thank you for sharing that with us. A lot of it, as Carol was saying, we may know, but there are a lot of people out there who don't know that history. And I've discussed with you previously how important I think that is. And it definitely, it gives the timeline of how we got here. And I think that it will inform people better and hopefully move towards resolution or some solutions to some of the problems that we have once people have a better understanding or just plain knowledge of the history. So I want to just thank you for sharing that and presenting that.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Dante, I wanted to say I was home when that played on television, that last video, and I think I remember watching that. And it was something that was said that was insensitive. I remember that. I remember that very well because I was in DC. I was in Maryland.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Other thoughts or questions or comments, disagreements on the concept of white supremacy, things like that?
Dante, just reiterate what you say sometimes is it's not just our history, it's our present, right? So
absolutely,
it is happening right now in different levels. But for me, the issue is always is to keep it going, not just hey, let's talk about it now and then it disappears. You got to keep it alive. And every little subcommittee that we're doing, all the policies we're trying to change, the training, everything, this has to be part of it, not just hey, we just check off. Okay, we know what equity is. Yay, let's move forward. Right. It's got to stay alive. So, and I know you believe in that, so I just wanted to reiterate it. Thank you.
I appreciate that because it really is not a history lesson because each of the communities that you saw in those slides, it's real to them. They are connected to it. I mean, I know people who've been in Indian boarding schools. I know folks who have family who were in concentration camps because they're Japanese. My father died before he could legally take his white wife to Arkansas to visit his family. So this is real and connected to so many people who are going through trauma every day. And so we just have to understand this is not a history lesson. It is based on the historical trappings of what happened, but that still impacts everything right now, right today.
I was just going to state one thing that I think it does. It gives a really good frame to the work that we're doing. And when you talk about the lens of dominant culture, And because that is a lot of what we're looking at here in policies and sort of things that have come through over time. And I think that's a very relevant lens for us to look through as we consider this work.
Thank you. In the work I do, I describe the dominant culture as straight, white, Christian, able-bodied, and male. And how does that dominant culture paradigm impact and affect everything and everyone not within it? Because that is the default, right? Well, I want to appreciate that we're past 6, and don't want to cut the conversation off if anybody wants to make any comments. Or please send us some comments or send me comments if you like. But hopefully that helps really provide a foundation for why we're doing what we're doing, why you're doing what you're doing every day in the communities where you walk around. Because people are being harmed every day. And so we have to recognize that and figure out how best to begin to address that with an equity lens. And what is the lens by which we're going to evaluate policies, budget, other things that I've said. And so hopefully it provides some foundation for you from which to help do your work. And that's really what this was for, to really provide some foundation to help you be more comfortable at the very least in doing your work. So I thank you for that. Going back to the agenda, thank you, Cindy Lou. I want to make sure that we go back to the original comment about the minutes. The most recent minutes from the last meeting were October 21st. So I guess it has been a while. Seems like a while. But are there any additions or corrections if you've had a chance to look at those minutes? And if not, are we willing to approve the minutes as they've been submitted?
Approve.
Second.
Cindy Lou seems like she's ready to tell me something. So Cindy Lou.
Well, I just wanted to confirm, we're actually looking to receive approval on 4 sets of minutes.
On which?
Sets of minutes include September 2nd, September 16th, 30th, October 7th, and October 21st. And if anyone had changes, I'm happy to make them, or if you approve them over consensus, we'll just proceed.
Anyone who opposes the minutes as they've been submitted? Okay, so it sounds like we have consensus on the approval of those minutes. Thank you, Commissioner.
Great.
And then in terms of the end of the year next meeting, I'm sorry, was there more? Okay. In terms of the end of the year and the next several meetings before the end of the year, Larry, if you wouldn't mind, would you like to go through those dates? Because you always have such a good string of those dates in your head or in front of you, so I'll just pass that over to you.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, so we are, I think, envisioning that subcommittees will convene next week. I know that some folks may be taking some time off, but I think the expectation was that the subcommittees would squeeze in a meeting next week and that they would do so on their regular Wednesday slots. So I've got policies and practice at 6 alongside school safety, and then training at, I'm sorry, I meant to say 4. Policies and practices at 4, school safety at 4, and then training at 5, all on Wednesday, the 25th. And then we would be alternating between subcommittee and full commission on the subsequent Wednesdays. So we would have full commission Wednesday, December 2nd at 5, subcommittees the evening of Wednesday, December 9th. And then, as I mentioned, the full commission slot on the 16th is one in which I'd like for you all to plan on having a public listening session, if you're amenable to that, to use that time for a listening session open to the general public. And then I think that would close out our meetings, obviously, with Christmas coming shortly thereafter and New Year's.
Great. Could you run through it just one more time, just so it's solid?
So we'll have subcommittee on November 25th, full commission December 2nd, subcommittee December 9th, and full commission with public listening session December 16th. And then we'll stop for the year 2020.
Great. And Cindy Lou, I'll pause and see if that's how you have it down. Any questions?
That is how I have it down. Are we beginning January 6th with a regular commission meeting then? And then we'll follow the pattern through the year. Thank you.
I believe that
See
would
the
be
nod,
correct.
so.
Okay, great. Thank you. Commissioners, any thoughts on kind of that list? Okay. All right. That is our agenda for the evening. Also, well, not quite. Commissioner Prospero, we're going to have him offer this thought, but I'll save him the dilemma and suggest that from this point forward for the full commission meetings, just in terms of reality, that we will schedule them for 90 minutes, recognizing that people often have to get off after 60 minutes, et cetera. But I think it's just kind of false hope that we can get everything done in 60 minutes. Certainly when we start receiving subcommittee reports and discussing those subcommittee reports and possibly voting on or finding consensus on recommendations on those reports, that's not going to happen in 60 minutes. And so we will just schedule it for 90 just in terms of being realistic, because most of the time we're not done in 60 minutes anyway. I don't think I've ever seen you since the beginning be done in 60 minutes. And so just in terms of reality, we'll schedule them for 90, recognizing some folks may have to be off time for that.
One thing I was just going to add to your thought, Dante, is that we will keep a close eye on the number of commissioners that remain on the call after 6 o'clock. And if we drop below a quorum, we will not take action just for on the technical side of that change.
Absolutely. Thank you. So any thoughts or just absolute disagreement or heartburn with that process? Okay. Any final thoughts before we?
Before we leave,
Reverend Davis?
I'd like to just remind the commission that I did report to the Human Rights Commission about the work that the committee is doing, that the commission is doing. And basically I said to them three things. One, that what the commission is made up of, there are 21 people. Secondly, that it has been divided into committees, subcommittees to do the work. And then thirdly, that we were in the information gathering stage. And that's basically what I reported to the Human Rights Commission. They also extended an invitation to host one of the listening sessions if we ever have need of such. Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend Davis. Anything else, commissioners, or we'll either give you back 11 minutes or we stole 19 from you. So whichever way you want to look at it, from your day. All right.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. We will see you again. Stay safe out there.
Thank you.
Dos Vidania.
Thank you.
All right.
Is he gone? Is he gone?